In this lecture, we are going to conclude our discussion on data controller by looking at parts 3, 4, and 5 of the definition. This includes looking at alone or jointly, purposes and means. We are then going to look at the difference between essential and non-essential means. And we will conclude with part 5, which is the processing of personal data. For part 3, alone or jointly, this is pretty straightforward. Several entities may be controllers if they make decisions collectively. So I want you to think about a website operator. Maybe they sell direct to consumer, and they also host third-party ad networks in addition to selling their product to customers, to also generate some ad revenue. So in essence, the website operator and the ad network are both collecting and processing data of the website visitors. And so they would be joint controllers. For purposes, and here we're talking about purposes and means, this is the why. Why are we collecting this data? What is the intended goal of the processing? Some pretty simple examples. Banks collect customer data in order to help them manage finances. Law firms collect clients' data in order to provide legal representation. And an e-commerce website will collect name and address in order to fulfill shipping and also to bill customers for the goods they purchase. When we're talking about the means of processing, we're asking how this data is processed. Now, this includes all possible methods and operations performed on personal data, everything throughout the entire data lifecycle. This is from collecting all the way to erasure and destruction. Various stages in the data lifecycle include, again, collection, recording, structuring, alteration, retrieval, use, disclosure, aggregation, restriction, and erasure and destruction. Now, when it comes to determining means, there are essential means and non-essential means. Knowing the difference between essential and non-essential helps to clarify which decisions are reserved for the controller and which can be delegated to the processor. So in reality, the controller is not micromanaging the processor. The controller gives the processor the space and time to determine the specifics of how the processing will be carried out. Essential means are closely linked to the purpose and scope of processing. This is typically reserved for the controller. Non-essential means would be more practical technical aspects of how the processing is being implemented. And so the processor can determine, again, they have the space for this, as long as the controller is not being contradicted. And so in some cases, maybe we have a controller that already has everything planned out, and the processor must abide by, these procedures, these processes, for example. But in other cases, the controller might not quite be so restrictive. Examples of essential include the type of personal data that's processed, the duration of the processing, the categories of recipients, that is, who will have access to the data, and the categories of data subjects. Examples of non-essential means include choice of hardware or software, detailed security measures such as encryption or firewall configurations, and internal allocation of tasks, that is, which staff will do what. And really, when you think about it, it would be a little awkward if a controller said, you must be using Apple iOS, or all of your mobile devices must be Android, or only Sally can do this, only Peter can do that. And so there are going to be some things that the processor has some leeway to determine on their own. And again, this is specifically concerning the implementation, the carrying out of the controller's instructions. Here's a quick example. So let's imagine that we have EFG Corporation. This is the controller, and they hire a processor, Better Have My Money Inc., to manage employee salary payments. And so EFG Corporation, they instruct the processor which data to process, who should receive payments and when, and how long to retain the data. Better Have My Money Incorporated, in contrast, they determine which payroll software to use, how to structure their internal team to handle the processing, and which security tools to implement in order to meet the controller's requirements. Our final part here is the processing of personal data. This can be linked to single or multiple processing activities, and there can be different operators involved in the different activities at different stages. Let's look at an example. So let's say that we have an online retailer who wants to run an email marketing campaign to promote a new product line to their customers. We have three different actors here. We have the online retailer, we have a marketing agency, and we also have an email service provider. So the online retailer, this is the controller. Again, this is the organization that is selling directly to customers. They are marketing to customers. When a customer buys their product, they're collecting the data, etc. So the online retailer decides why and how personal data is processed. They determine the recipient group, the message content, and the campaign schedule. The marketing agency, this is our processor, they are hired by the retailer to design the campaign, to create content, and to manage the campaign. We then have a sub-processor. This is the email service provider, or ESP. So our agency, the marketing agency, which is the processor, they use the email service provider to distribute emails, to process data, and they process data solely at the discretion of the agency, and then ultimately the retailer. So again, this is just an example of what that data lifecycle would look like, from collecting data of prospective customers who are interested in our product, to creating all of the marketing copy, to sending everything out to the customers to hopefully generate some interest in these products. In this lecture, we concluded our discussion on personal data. We looked at parts 3, 4, and 5. When we're talking about alone or jointly, remember that several entities may be controllers if they make decisions collectively. When it comes to purposes, we're asking the question, why? Why is this data collected? What is the intended goal of the processing? With regards to means, we're asking the question, how? What are all of the possible methods and operations that are performed on the personal data? For the means, we can divide this into two different buckets, essential and non-essential. For essential, this is data that's closely linked to the purpose and scope of processing. Non-essential means, however, this is the more practical, technical aspects of how processing is implemented. Finally, remember, when it comes to processing personal data, we're looking at the entire data life cycle. The processing can be linked to single or multiple processing activities and actors. That is, different operators can be involved in different activities of the processing at different stages.